In recent times, an unprecedented super rupture has been unfolding. What is it? Let's start with this one event. Denmark has announced that it will formulate a plan to deploy 1,000 combat troops to Greenland in 2026, including naval and air force units. This plan, in reality, already amounts to the opening of hostilities, because Denmark has made it clear that it has already deployed 150 combat troops to Kangerlussuaq Airport, the most important strategic airport in Greenland. This airport is far from the coastline, and compared with other airports in Greenland, it is much less affected by fog and strong winds. Greenland lies in the Arctic, with an extremely harsh climate. If anyone were to invade Greenland, the optimal choice would be to send troops first-hand seize this airport. After that, transport aircraft could land, bringing in additional troops and supplies. So Denmark rushed to deploy 150 combat troops to this airport. The message could not be clearer: we get there first and hold the airport. That way, even if the United States wants to invade, the difficulty will be far greater. At the same time, Denmark also stated that it has dispatched another 150 soldiers to Nuuk, the capital of Greenland. In addition, the European multinational force, which had previously been mocked relentlessly online, has recently sent another batch of troops to Greenland. Take France as an example. Its first deployment to Greenland was only a 15-member mountain warfare unit. That number has now increased to 30. These troops are also currently stationed in Nuuk. Meanwhile, Denmark's Arctic Command announced that in the near future, with Danish troops as the core and in coordination with European forces, targeted military exercise will be conducted in Greenland. So how should we understand this? A few days ago, when someone asked about Greenland, I already said, don't mock the first European deployment for having only 37 soldiers, because the number of US troops currently stationed in Greenland is also not large. Roughly a little over 100 people, and they are mainly radar personnel, responsible for monitoring whether Russian or other countries' intercontinental ballistic missiles pass over the Arctic. Although these people wear military uniforms, they have received very little actual combat training. If real fighting broke out, they might not even defeat those 37 European soldiers. In a place like this icy, remote, and extreme, first, it is very hard to deploy troops. Second, deploying more troops doesn't necessarily help. On top of that, 6 days ago, the Danish Ministry of Defense stated publicly, if the United States dares to invade Greenland, Danish soldiers are authorized to shoot first and report later. At this point, don't you start to feel that Europe and the United States are truly on the verge of tearing their relationship apart? Next, let's talk about another event. Recently, the Davos Forum has been underway. Canadian Prime Minister Carney attended and was repeatedly pressed by the media with a question. The media asked, didn't you previously say that middle powers should unite among themselves rather than rely on superpowers? Then doesn't your recent visit to China actually make Canada more dependent on another superpower? Carney answered. He said this approach is not about confronting superpowers, but about taking the initiative within a safe range to secure the greatest possible benefits for Canada. The media then followed up. During the Biden era, the entire West, including Canada, followed the United States in decoupling or de-risking from China. Now you've suddenly made a 180-degree turn. Is it because the theory is now a risk greater than de-risking from China? This question was ruthless, because the so-called other risk clearly referred to the changes brought about by Trump's return. What happened next surprised everyone. Under normal circumstances, even if Carney acknowledged it, he would have spoken vaguely and evasively. But this time, Carney spoke bluntly. When a country like the United States actively decouples itself from the shared network of relationships, It only causes those who remain within the network to cling together more tightly. At this point, aren't you a little shocked? Canada is, after all, one of the so-called Anglo-Saxon five. Yet here is the Canadian Prime Minister, at such a major international forum, openly stating, "We have broken with the United States, and we have chosen others to align with." But do you think that's the end of it? No. Just in the past couple of days, the Canadian military suddenly stepped forward and released an extremely shocking statement. They said that after repeatedly simulating scenarios of a US invasion of Canada, they reached the conclusion guerrilla warfare is the best way to fight the United States. The Canadian military stated clearly, if conventional warfare were pursued, within as little as 2 days, US FORCEs would break through Canada's defensive lines. In other words, with Canada's current military strength, it is completely incapable of fighting the United States in a conventional war. So what should be done? The Canadian military believes that asymmetric warfare must be adopted, including small non-regular units, armed civilians carrying out ambushes, sabotage operations, drone warfare, and hit-and-run attacks. There is only one goal: to drag the war out and pull the United States into a quagmire that it cannot sustain economically or in resources. Seeing this, aren't you even more stunned? Even 1 year ago, who could have imagined US-Canada relations ending up like this? Now, the Canadian military has openly stated it is preparing to repel a US invasion. But do you think this is still not over? It's not. Not long ago, Trump announced on social media that starting February 1st, the United States would impose a uniform 10% tariff on imports from Denmark, Norway, Sweden, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, and Finland. He also declared that starting June 1st, the tariff would be raised to 25%, until those countries agree to the U.S. proposal for the complete and total purchase of Greenland. The immediate background to this was, just 2 days before the tariff announcement, these 8 European countries had announced troop deployments to Greenland, a total of 37 soldiers to assist Denmark in preventing a US invasion. The smallest contribution, for example, from the UK was purely symbolic, one single person, and Trump exploded in rage, sent one person, and the tariff jumped straight to 25%. Not long ago, people still believed that Anglo-Saxon 5, or the Five Eyes Alliance, were unbreakable ethnic alliances. How much time has passed? In the blink of an eye, they turned on each other. The situation is now very clear. The boss is beating number 2, number 3, and number 4 Australia and number 5 New Zealand are also not on particularly good terms with the United States right now. So what can we see from this entire chain of events? I have said this before, for more than 400 years, Europe and the United States used the concept of the West to bind themselves together, making the entire world believe they were a single entity. But now, we are witnessing a transformation unseen in 400 years. The United States, Europe, and Canada, this so-called Western bloc, is splintering and disintegrating. And this is not the whole story. At this point, we can go even deeper. How did this so-called Western bloc come into existence? Let's start with an event from just over 10 days ago. On January 7th, Putin attended a Christmas prayer service at a church in a Trednoy village, Voronezh, Russia. Afterward, the Kremlin's press office issued a message wishing everyone a Merry Christmas. Seeing this, some people might find it strange. Isn't Christmas on December 25th? Why do Russians celebrate it on January 7th? To answer that, we must go back to a major event in the year 1054 AD, nearly 1,000 years ago. That year, Patriarch Michael Cerularius of Constantinople and Pope Leo IX of Roma mutually excommunicated each other. From that moment on, Christianity formally split into the Eastern Church and the Western Church. The Eastern Church, to emphasize its legitimacy, came to call itself Orthodox. From then on, the two branches went their separate ways, and for centuries regarded each other as heretical. So where does the West we talk about today come from? To a large extent, it comes from the sphere of influence of the Western Church later known as Catholicism. For example, the UK, France, Spain, Portugal, the Netherlands, Belgium, Austria, Italy, a large group of familiar countries. Although centuries later the Protestant Reformation occurred, splitting off many denominations, their underlying foundation remained Catholic. Overall, then, the Western world religiously, despite internal differences, remained relatively united compared to the East. The Eastern Church, however, was far less fortunate. At the time, Christianity had four major patriarchates: Rome, Constantinople, Antioch, and Alexandria. After the split in 1054, the eastern side actually held a numerical advantage 3-1. But then, unexpectedly, Islam rose rapidly. The Antioch region was almost completely Islamized. Its once cohesive church shattered into fragments. Only scattered communities remained, surviving with difficulty in mountainous terrain. The Alexandrian Patriarchate, later known as the Coptic Orthodox Church, was likewise largely Islamized. But their luck was slightly better, because long before that, they had already carried out missionary work in Ethiopia. Today, Ethiopia has a population of over 100 million, more than half of whom are Christians. The year was 1896. Italy invaded Ethiopia. On March 1st, the two sides fought a decisive battle near Adwa in a mountainous gorge. The battle began around 2 in the morning and continued until sunrise, when both armies were exhausted. At that moment, on a sunlit mountain slope, a group suddenly appeared, the bishops of the Ethiopian Church. They were dark-skinned, wearing white robes, carrying on their shoulders a golden, radiant chest. The instant Ethiopian soldiers saw it, their morale exploded. Armed with spears and shields, they charged forward through gunfire and artillery toward the Italian army. In Ethiopian paintings of the Battle of Adwa, the clergy can still be seen standing atop the mountain. And the Italian troops, they were stunned, their morale collapsed instantly. Why? Because the chest carried by the clergy was the legendary Ark of the Covenant, a sacred relic of Christianity and Ethiopia's supreme national treasure without equal. It remains in Ethiopia today, and it is said that even people who have lived there 4 years have rarely seen it. Yet at that critical moment, this spiritual symbol unleashed an overwhelming force. The final result, the Italian army was completely annihilated. That year happened to be the height of Europe's scramble for Africa. Italy's crushing defeat turned it instantly into the laughingstock of Europe, mocked as utterly useless. Now back to the Church of Constantinople. It had once been the strongest, capable of rivaling Catholicism. But in 1453, with the fall of the Byzantine Empire, it was struck down by the Ottoman Turks, nearly wiped out. Fortunately, through early missionary work across the Eastern European plains, it preserved a vast sphere of faith. Today's Russia, Belarus, Serbia, Bulgaria, and others. This region alone has a population of over 100 million, nearly 200 million. And within this space, many unexpected dynamics emerged. For example, Poland. Ethnically, Poles are West Slavs and theoretically close to Russia. But the issue is Poland is Catholic. Russia wanted to pull it into the Eastern camp. Poland's response: "Pa, you're the Eastern Bloc. Your whole family is Eastern. We are the West." So regardless of whether Russia treated Poland well or badly, Poland's instinctive reaction was always the same: stay away from me. I have nothing to do with you. The Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Hungary are similar cases. The 3 Baltic states were historically Catholic territory as well. Thus emerged a strange condition ethnically leaning east, but religiously and culturally entering west. To escape this split between body and spirit, these countries often became even more pro-Western. During the Cold War, NATO and the Warsaw Pact confronted each other. On the surface, everything seemed stable, but in reality, the seeds of Eastern Europe's upheaval had already been planted. Even the collapse of the Soviet Union first cracked opening the Baltic states. After that, Western Europe, the old Catholic heartland, launched global colonization. The United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand were all replicated through this process. When religion gradually faded, this group did not disappear, it simply adopted a new name, the West. Since Catholicism alone could no longer define it, the term became Western world. But its true foundation remained Catholicism plus the denominations born of the Reformation and the territories they occupied. This structure has endured for more than 400 years. Now, we can truly understand what the recent events mean. The disintegration of the so-called Western Bloc, the United States, Europe, and Canada, is absolutely not a small matter. It is a huge matter. Because once this bloc truly breaks apart, it means comprehensive decoupling, ideological, political, and economic. Countless new opportunities will be released from this fragmentation, and countless existing orders, once taken for granted, will disappear entirely. What is happening now is not merely another empire entering its twilight. It is the greatest rupture in 400 years.